From VOA Learning English, this is the Education Report. Last year, 200,000 Chinese students studied in the United States. That was a 23% increase over the previous year. The Institute of International Education in New York reports that 26,000 U.S. students were in China in 2011. They included 15,000 people studying for academic credit and 11,000 taking part in other educational activities. A program called the 100,000 Strong Initiative is trying to increase the number of Americans studying in China. The State Department launched the program in 2010. The goal is to send 100,000 students to China during a 4-year period. Last year, the nonprofit 100,000 Strong Foundation was launched. Project Pengyou is one of the groups the foundation supports. It connects American students who have lived or studied in China. Project Pengyou is based in Beijing and led by Holly Chang. She says personal ties formed while studying abroad can have an effect on relations between the United States and China. She says there is still a huge amount of misunderstanding between the two countries. The Chinese government has offered 20,000 scholarships to Americans under what is known as the U.S.-China Consultation on People-to-People Exchange. The 100,000 Strong Foundation has no official relationship with the Chinese government, but the foundation says it works closely with Chinese government officials to encourage more Americans to seek these Chinese scholarships. The goal is to give more Americans a chance to get a taste of Chinese culture. For VOA Learning English, I'm Laurel Bowman.
This is the VOA Special English Education Report. Charter schools operate with public money, but without many of the rules that govern traditional public schools. In the United States, the rules for charter schools differ from state to state. But in general, these schools have greater freedom to decide what to teach and how to teach it. A charter school might be independent or connected to the local public school system. It might be started by teachers, parents, community groups, or in some cases, a profit-making business. The charter is a performance contract. It establishes the goals of the school and other details like how student performance will be measured. 47 million students attend traditional public schools, but more than 1 million students attend charter schools. And now a group of charter schools have formed the Green Charter Schools Network. The idea is to have environmentally friendly school buildings, but to also go further than that. The schools teach students to become involved in community issues that affect them and the environment. For example, young children grow crops in a school garden and learn about healthy eating. Older students help recycle waste from the cafeteria. And local schools share what they grow in community gardens with people in need. Jim McGrath is president of the Green Charter Schools Network. He says there are about 200 green charter schools across the United States. He says the plan is to also include traditional public schools as well as private schools. He says every action we make has an effect on the earth, and we all need to be change agents so that we do not destruct our natural resources for future generations. The Green Charter Schools Network holds its first national conference this October in Minnesota. It will include companies and organizations like Waste Management and the United States Green Building Council. Supporters of green schools say their goal is to expand the movement across the country. And that's the VOA Special English Education Report. Is your school doing anything special to go green? You can tell the world by posting a comment at voaspecialenglish.com. You can also read and listen to all of our reports and watch captioned videos. Plus, we now offer a verb phrase of the day by SMS. The service is free, but standard message rates may apply.
This is the VOA Special English Education Report. An old problem is getting new attention in the United States: bullying. Recent cases included the tragic case of a 15-year-old girl whose family moved from Ireland. Phoebe Prince hanged herself in Massachusetts in January following months of bullying. Her parents criticized her school for failing to protect her. Officials have brought criminal charges against several teenagers. Judy Kuczynski is president of an anti-bullying group called Bully Police USA. Her daughter Tina was the victim of severe bullying starting in middle school in the state of Minnesota. Judy Kuczynski says her daughter was a very outgoing child, very involved in all kinds of things, and had lots of friends. But over a period of time, her grades fell completely. She developed health problems. She couldn't sleep. She wasn't eating. She had terrible stomach pains and started grinding her teeth at night. And she did not want to go to school. Bullying is defined as negative behavior repeated over time against the same person. It can involve physical violence, or it can be verbal, for example, insults or threats. Spreading lies about someone or excluding a person from a group is known as social or relational bullying. And now there is cyberbullying, which uses the internet, email, or text messages. It has easy appeal for the bully because it does not involve face-to-face contact, and it can be done at any time. The first serious research studies into bullying were done in Norway in the late 1970s. The latest government study in the United States was released last year. It found that about 1/3 of students aged 12 to 18 were bullied at school. Examples included being made fun of, pushed, spit on, threatened, or excluded from activities. Some students had their property damaged. About 4% reported being the victims of cyberbullying. The study took place in 2007. Susan Swearer is a psychologist at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and co-director of the Bullying Research Network. She says schools should treat bullying as a mental health problem to get bullies and victims the help they need. She says bullying is connected to depression, anxiety, and antisocial behavior, and bullies are often victims themselves. What can be done to prevent bullying? That will be our subject next week. And that's the VOA Special English Education Report.
This is the VOA Special English Education Report. Ballou High School in Washington might not seem the most likely school to have a lacrosse team, but lacrosse has grown beyond the popular image of a sport mainly for wealthy private schools. Ballou is a public school in one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city. In the past 6 years, more than 40 students have died violent deaths. Many were the result of drug violence. Ballou has just had its first year with a lacrosse team. The team is for girls. They lost every game. But their coach, Holly McGarvey, says this was also the first time they ever played. She says the goal was just to start building a foundation that we can build from and create a tradition of women's lacrosse here at Ballou. Lacrosse is a fast-moving sport, the modern version of a game played by American Indians. Teams try to make goals with a ball caught and thrown using a net at the end of a stick. School officials decided to make changes at Ballou after less than 60% of the senior class graduated in 2006. Since then, the graduation rate has improved by 10 to 15%. Raman Branch, the school principal, says one change was to increase activities after the school day. That included adding a girls' lacrosse team. Mr. Branch says Holly McGarvey was a perfect match for Ballou. She was on a national lacrosse team and a star player at Princeton University. She was in her first year of teaching. She wanted to take the lessons she learned from sports and use them in teaching biology. Coach McGarvey says the first practices for the new team were difficult. Some players got angry at one another. She helped them learn to keep their mind on the game. She remembers how excited the girls were on their way home from their first game. They had failed to score even one goal, but, she says, they were already in the mindset of what can we do better. Lacrosse player Tylashia Joyner says the sport has helped her think more about her future. She says she wants to play in college because it will keep me in shape and it will help me stay focused and want to do something. Because if you want to play a sport, you have to have your grades up. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. You can download MP3s of our programs and get podcasts at voaspecialenglish.com. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and iTunes at VOA Learning English. I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Education Report. Americans celebrated the Thanksgiving holiday on November 25th. They gathered with family and friends to share a meal. Some celebrated the holiday by telling what they are most thankful for. This holiday season, a group of student athletes in Woodburn, Oregon, has given its community something to be thankful for. The Woodburn High School boys soccer team has reached the state soccer championship playoffs for 25 straight seasons. But the Bulldogs had never won the state championship until this year. Their victory in November also represents a win for their mostly Hispanic hometown. Writer Steve Wilson spent a year recording the successes and problems of the team. He wrote a book called The Boys from Little Mexico, a season chasing the American dream. It tells about a community struggling with issues such as immigration and cultural changes. Migrant farm workers from Mexico started coming to Woodburn, Oregon about 50 years ago. Many of the workers stayed and made the town their home. So the town became known as Little Mexico. Steve Wilson thinks the Woodburn boys soccer team's continued hard work and effort to win the state championship is similar to their cultural experiences. Like many Mexican Americans, the boys on the Woodburn team faced major problems. They include poverty, a language barrier, and immigration issues. Mr. Wilson wondered if those challenges were preventing the team from reaching its goal of winning a state championship. So he decided to follow the team for an entire season. He got to know the players, coaches, and supporters. One of the players he writes about in the book is Martin Maldonado Cortez. Martin says he and the other boys on the team knew that Woodburn had a bad image. The town has a population of only 22,000 people, but it faces many of the same problems found in large cities. These include gang violence and illegal drugs. He says when the team went to play other schools, the people did not act friendly toward them. Martin says his coaches told him to show pride in his culture. They told him to make an effort to be successful in life, and not just on the field. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. Our programs are online with transcripts and MP3 files at voaspecialenglish.com. And you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube at VOA Learning English.
This is the VOA Special English Education Report. In May, an international conference took place in Dakar, Senegal, to find new ways to get and keep girls in school. The United Nations Children's Fund says nearly 72 million children were not in school in 2007. More than half are girls, and more than 2/3 are in sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and West Asia. School attendance has improved in many areas, but the head of UNICEF, Anthony Lake, says, unless we all work harder, there may still be 56 million children out of school in 2015. He says progress and economic development depend on educating girls as well as boys. Educated girls are also at lower risk of violence, abuse, and diseases like HIV/AIDS. The UN Girls Education Initiative organized the meeting of 200 scholars, aid workers, and government officials from 22 countries. The initiative was launched in Dakar 10 years ago. The aim is to bring primary school education to all girls and boys worldwide by 2015. In Senegal, the number of public schools has doubled in the last 10 years. But UNICEF's Anthony Lake said schools still lack gender equality. He said girls in one Dakar school told him about a lack of bathrooms and textbooks for them and bullying from boys. The conference centered on three main problems to getting and keeping girls in school: violence, poverty, and poor quality education. Anne-Therese Ndongjata is Education Director for UNESCO in Africa. She says donors are giving a lot of resources and civil society groups are working on access to education. The UNESCO official says schools need to modernize and improve what they teach and how they teach it. For example, she says schools should teach African children in their native languages, not just in English or French. To stay in school, experts say children must consider their education useful, and so must their parents. May Rihani from the Global Advisory Committee of the UN Girls Initiative gave an example from a life skills program in Mali. One lesson is about diarrhea. The idea is for children to go tell their mother what they learned. May Rihani says the mother would recognize that this education is important to her and to her family and would want the child to continue to go to school. And that's the VOA Special English Education Report.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Education Report. Kid Pan Alley is a nonprofit organization that holds songwriting workshops for students across the United States. The organization recently visited a school in the Anacostia area of Washington, D.C. The children presented a concert with the help of songwriter and recording artist Paul Reisler. He established Kid Pan Alley in 1999 and has worked with more than 35,000 students and produced more than 2,200 songs since that time. He says the power of music can teach children skills they might not learn in school. He believes the American educational system is focused too much on standardized tests to measure success. But Paul Reisler says we now live in a creative economy. He says his group is trying to inspire children to be creative. At Orr Elementary School in Anacostia, 95% of students come from poor families. Marlon Ray is the school's dean of students. He says some of the children have difficult lives. But he says these kids still want to strive for greatness. Jonna Turner is director of programs at the school. She says the 4th and 5th grade students are often focused on more than school. They can be important helpers for their families. They make sure food is ready when they come home and do other tasks. Yet, students are often influenced by what happens around them. A shooting took place in April directly in front of the school. Although no one was injured, the event affected the whole community. Still, Orr Elementary School has a positive, hopeful atmosphere. Marlon Ray says the workshop and concert made possible by Kid Pan Alley created good memories that will last for years. For VOA Learning English, I'm Laurel Bowman.
This is the VOA Special English Education Report. Some women's prisons in the United States offer classes for college credit. But when the prisoners are released, they may not have much chance to continue their education. In 2000, a woman named Barbara Martinsons started a program to help these former prisoners. She established the College and Community Fellowship. Ms. Martinsons taught at Manhattan Marymount College in New York City. She has also taught college courses at a women's prison in New York State. The College and Community Fellowship provides advice to former prisoners. It also helps them gain admission to college. That process can be very difficult for anyone, let alone a person with a prison record. The group also provides financial aid to members attending college. Members of the College and Community Fellowship are called CCF Fellows. Some have earned not only college degrees, but master's degrees and a doctorate. Selena Fulford has already earned one master's degree and is working on her second. She is now an adjunct professor at the College of New Rochelle in New York State. About 70% of those in the program work full-time while studying. Nationally, 1/3 of women who have been in prison are later sent back for committing other crimes or violating the terms of their release. By comparison, almost none of the CCF fellows has been sent back behind bars. The Reverend Vivian Nixon, a minister, heads the College and Community Fellowship. She once spent time in prison for falsifying documents. She says the group helps people reclaim the goals they had for their lives before going to jail. You don't have to just accept any job at a fast food restaurant or cleaning up a hotel or cleaning up the streets, she says. As she puts it, you can still have desires and goals, and we are going to help you meet those desires and goals. About 270 people are in the program. The group holds meetings where the women talk about subjects like personal finance and developing a career, and there is a social hour. Vivian Nixon says society in general is happiest when the women do not go back to jail. But she says her greatest hope is that members of the fellowship are setting high goals for themselves and their children. We have more stories about education programs for people in or out of prison. You can find them, along with other reading and listening materials for learning English at voaspecialenglish.com. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Persutti. This is the VOA Special English Education Report. Since the 1990s, education has been required for all South Africans from age 7 to 15. Last December, the government announced that 70% of students passed their final examination to finish high school. In 2008, the passage rate was about 63%. There have been increases each year since then. Professor Shireen Motala at the University of Johannesburg says access to basic education is no longer the problem in South Africa. She says most children stay in school until they are about 16. The problem now, she says, is that large numbers of them leave without completing high school. Students take an examination known as the matric in grade 12, their final or matriculation year. But Professor Matala says only around 45% of the children who started school in 2000 sat for the matric last year. South Africa has a 24% unemployment rate. Those who drop out must compete with better educated people for jobs. Educational researchers also point to another problem. They say South African schools do not produce enough students with the skills for higher education in math and science. Researcher Graham Block says many schools are not well equipped. The reality of poverty, he says, is that many children do not see laboratories or libraries at school. 92% of the schools do not have libraries. Also, education specialists say in many cases, teachers and school principals do not have the skills or training to do their jobs. In other cases, they are simply not doing their duty to provide an education. Professor Matala says a number of teachers were poorly trained during the system of apartheid or racial separation in South Africa. Apartheid ended in 1994. Secondly, she says, teachers have been confused by the many educational reform efforts in the last 15 years. And finally, she thinks language differences in the classroom have not gotten as much attention as they should. Subjects such as math and science are taught in English, starting at about age 10. But South Africa has 11 official languages and many more unofficial ones. South Africa's Minister of Basic Education promises a number of improvements. Andri Matshega says teacher development efforts will focus on subject and content knowledge and making sure the correct teachers are in the correct jobs. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Persutti.
This is the VOA Special English Education Report. 26,000 foreign exchange students are in American high schools this year. We asked 4 teenagers who arrived in August to discuss their experience so far. All but one are attending public schools in Fairfax County, Virginia, outside Washington. Johanna is from Germany. She says the biggest difference is the relationship to the teachers. She says here the teachers are more like friends, and in Germany they're more like parents. Another difference? In American high schools, the students are usually the ones who move to different classrooms for different subjects. Johanna and Daniel come from schools where the teachers change classrooms. Daniel says, in Austria, you have all classes together with the same group of people. And so you are really good friends with all the people you're in class with. Hande from Turkey is living with a host family in Denver, Colorado. She says students in Turkish schools have less choice. She says, you cannot choose your own classes, and you don't have the right to drop out of one of them. Hande says Turkish schools are also more formal. She says, when a teacher comes into the class, you have to stand up and greet the teacher. He or she says good morning or good afternoon, and as a class, you answer. We don't do this in class here. How does the education compare? Hande is in 3 advanced placement classes, which are meant to prepare students for college. She says AP courses are really hard, and they really force you to learn and are really good. But the regular classes, their level is lower than in Turkey. Rosa is from a country where high school is 5 years, not 4 like in America. She says, in Italy, we go to school only during the morning for lessons, and Italian schools don't have other activities. On the other hand, she says, having to go elsewhere for activities is not necessarily a bad thing. She says she thinks students in Italy and Europe have a freer environment. They are in touch with a lot of different things that are outside the school. And that's the VOA Special English Education Report. To learn more about high school exchange programs, go to voaspecialenglish.com. You can also comment on this and other programs. And you can find us on YouTube and Twitter at VOA Learning English. This is the VOA Special English Education Report. Today, we answer a question from a listener in Colombia. John Anderson wants to know the costs of undergraduate and graduate study in the United States. Well, the first thing to know is that prices are different from school to school. Private colleges and universities generally cost more than public ones. Another thing to keep in mind is that not all students pay a school's published price. Financial aid and scholarships may reduce the cost. Here are a few numbers for this school year from the College Board Organization. The average published price for undergraduate study at a 4-year public college was about $7,000. That was for students from in-state. Students from other states, as well as international students, paid an average of more than $18,000. This is the bad news. International students often have to pay the highest prices. And these averages were only for tuition and fees. Food, housing, books, and supplies can add $10,000 to $12,000 a year. The College Board says the average tuition at a private college was about $26,000. Many students save money by starting their education at a 2-year public college, also known as a community college. The average tuition this year was about $2,500. A few American colleges provide a free education, including the military and merchant marine academies. They accept some foreign students. Berea College is a small Christian school in Berea, Kentucky, that pays all first-year costs for its foreign students. But they are expected to pay $1,000 a year after that. Summer jobs are provided to help meet this cost. Costs for graduate study in the United States also differ from school to school and even from program to program. Here, too, public universities charge more for out-of-state tuition. For example, at the University of Kentucky, out-of-state graduate tuition averaged about $18,000 this year. In-state was about $9,000. American students often have to take out loans to help pay for their education. President Obama recently signed into law a bill that changes the student loan system. We'll have more on that next week. And international students can learn much more about studying in the United States on our website. Look for the Foreign Student Series at voaspecialenglish.com. And that's the VOA Special English Education Report.
This is the VOA Special English Education Report. Teachers and parents usually call attention to the pictures when they read storybooks to preschool children. But a new study suggests that calling attention to the words and letters on the page may lead to better readers. The 2-year study compared children who were read to this way in class with children who were not. Those whose teachers most often discussed the print showed clearly higher skills in reading, spelling, and understanding. These results were found 1 year and even 2 years later. Shane Piasta, an assistant professor of teaching and learning at Ohio State University, was an author of the study. She says most preschool teachers would find this method manageable and would need only a small change in the way they teach. They already read storybooks in class. The only difference would be increased attention to the printed text. Ms. Piasta says if you get children to pay attention to letters and words, it makes sense that they will do better at word recognition and spelling. But she says research suggests that very few parents and teachers do this in a systematic way. The report appears in the journal Child Development. More than 300 children aged 4 and 5 were observed in classrooms in Ohio and Virginia. The children came from poor families and were below average in their language skills. This put them at risk for reading problems later. For 30 weeks, the children took part in a program called Project STAR for Sit Together and Read. The project is based at Ohio State. It tests the short-term and long-term results of reading regularly to preschool children in their classrooms. Laura Justice at Ohio State says researchers think they understand how information about print is transmitted from the adult to the child. This knowledge can be gained by having focused discussions when reading a book out loud. Professor Justice says this intervention can help adults center in on the things that children need and want to learn. There are different ways that adults can talk to children about print. They can point to a letter and discuss it, and even trace the shape with a finger. They can point out a word. This is dog. They can discuss the meaning of the print or how the words tell the story. And they can talk about the organization of the print. For instance, showing how words are written left to right in English. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Persutti. You can read and listen to our programs at voaspecialenglish.com.
This is the VOA Special English Education Report. Today, we have the last of 3 reports on bullying. Last week, we shared some of your comments on this issue. Now, we talk to a researcher who presented a study in May at the Pediatric Academic Society's meeting in Vancouver, Canada. Rashmi Shetgiri is a pediatrician at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center and Children's Medical Center, Dallas. Dr. Shetgiri said about 30% of American children are involved in bullying. She said about 13% of them are bullies, 11% are victims, and 6% are both bullies and victims. The new study led by Dr. Shetgiri shows that parents could help prevent bullying by improving communication and involvement with their children. The study identified factors that seem to increase or decrease the risk that a child will be a bully. She said children who have emotional or developmental problems or who have mothers who have poor mental health are more likely to be bullies. Older children and children who live in homes where their primary language is not English are less likely to be bullies. Another difference, the study found that African American and Latino children were more likely to be bullies compared to white children. For the study, the researchers used the 2007 National Survey of Children's Health. Parents of children aged 10 to 17 were asked whether their child bullies or is cruel or mean to others. Not surprisingly, how a parent acts may also influence whether or not a child becomes a bully. Parents who often get angry with their children and feel that the children often do things that bother them a lot are much more likely to have a child who becomes a bully. However, parents who share ideas with their children and talk with them are much less likely to have children who become bullies. University of Nebraska psychologist Susan Swearer says, communication between students and teachers can also reduce bullying. She says studies have shown improvement when students are taught about bullying and respectful behavior. Some programs also try to get people to intervene to stop bullying. Professor Swearer advises parents and teachers to try to get children to talk to them about being bullied. Otherwise, a child could feel hopeless and helpless to do anything about it. And that's the VOA Special English Education Report.
I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Education Report. No one likes to make mistakes, but a new study says organizations learn more from their failures than their successes and keep that knowledge longer. One of the researchers was Vinit Desai, an assistant professor at the University of Colorado Denver Business School. He worked with Peter Madsen from the Marriott School of Management at Brigham Young University in Utah. They did not find much long-term organizational learning from success. It is possible, they say. But Professor Desai says they found that knowledge gained from failure lasts for years. He says organizations should treat failures as a learning opportunity and not try to ignore them. The study looked at companies and organizations that launch satellites and other space vehicles. Professor Desai compared 2 American space shuttle flights. In 2002, a piece of insulating material broke off during launch and damaged a rocket on the Atlantis. Still, the flight was considered a success. Then, in early 2003, a piece of insulation struck the Columbia during launch. This time, the shuttle broke apart on re-entry and the 7 crew members died. NASA officials suspended all flights, and an investigation led to suggested changes. Professor Desai says the search for solutions after a failure can make leaders more open-minded. He points to airlines as an example of an industry that has learned from failures in the past. He advises organizations to look for useful information in small failures and failures they avoided. The mistakes we learn from do not have to be our own. We asked people on our Facebook page to tell us a time they had done something really silly. Fabricio Semino wrote, "Not long ago, I wanted to watch TV, but it wouldn't turn on, so I did everything I could to start it. 30 minutes later, my mom shows up and, passing by, says to me, 'Did you try plugging it?' I was like, 'I'm just dusting, Mom,' so she wouldn't notice how dumb I am sometimes." Bruno Kanieski da Silva told about a time he looked everywhere for his key. It was in his pocket. He wrote, "I always promise I will never do it again. But after a few weeks, where is my wallet? For sure it will be in a very logical place." You can find more comments like these on Facebook at VOA Learning English. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
From VOA Learning English, this is Education. Immigration reform is a top policy goal this year in Washington. President Obama and a group of Democratic and Republican senators who have been preparing legislation agree on one thing. Millions of immigrants who are in the United States illegally will have to start learning English before they can begin the process of becoming legal residents. But school systems that face shrinking budgets are still cutting or eliminating English classes. Overcrowding is especially bad in California. That state is home to 1 of every 4 non-English speaking immigrants in the United States. But Margie McHugh of the Migration Policy Institute predicts a huge amount of unmet demand for English training all across the country. She says the current system is too limited. Until recently, California law provided money to be used just for adult education. But to help schools meet funding shortages, state legislators let them use that money for other programs. In Los Angeles, the adult education program has been cut by 75%. Once, the school district offered English at hundreds of neighborhood sites with day and evening classes. This year, the teaching hours will be reduced. California Governor Jerry Brown wants to take responsibility for adult education away from school districts. Their main focus is on children. He wants to give the responsibility to community colleges. Adult schools across the country are experimenting with computerized English instruction. They hope software will help substitute for the individual attention that beginning students need. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Presutti.